Most anti-theist arguments aren't wrong because they're evil. They're wrong because they're shallow.
Well, that is an insta-fail if I ever did done see one, on both counts no less. Cause whether you meant to or not, you are suggesting that an argument being quote-unquote evil would have any impact on whether or not it's correct. That, my friend, is an appeal to consequences. Even if the result of an argument being true were to suck, that doesn't magically make it not true. And secondly, the depth of an argument also does not affect whether or not it reflects reality. In fact, some of the best arguments are beautifully simple, and it helps them to demonstrate their point, usually by making the fewest assumptions. And of course, there are plenty of endlessly wordy arguments with backstories that would make the Silmarillion blush, and they are obviously nonsensical gibberish. Great start!
In this video, I'm ranking every mainstream anti-theist argument, and only one of them actually deserves serious recognition.
What are the chances that by only one of them deserving any recognition, what he really means is he only barely understood one of them, so the rest are wrong by default? And shit, I'll bet even if they are ultimately shallow, evil, or even actually wrong somehow, assuming that he's not simply straw-manning the shit out of them, that his arguments against them are absolute dog water.
The tiers will be as follows: strong for arguments that command respect, flawed for arguments that have some logic behind them, negative IQ for arguments that go against the idea that humans can be classified as an intelligent life form, and abyss for arguments born out of immorality.
Well, ignoring the irony that every theist argument I've ever heard exists exclusively in the low IQ range, especially since sound arguments have to reply to actual reality, one assumes he meant valid, or perhaps intentionally didn't use that word because when it comes to philosophical arguments, it is a lot harder for something to be sound than it is to be valid. Which is why theists love valid arguments and stay away from attempting sound ones, mostly because in formal logic, sound arguments are more or less simply true, making it very funny that you wrote what you wrote. But who knows? More importantly, I don't know how you know an argument is born out of immorality. An argument, good or bad, flawed or perfectly logical, can be created for endless reasons. But assuming you know the one true reason for all of them, now that's born out of pure narcissistic impulses to believe that you know what's happening in other people's heads. A failure that is made so often by apologists in particular. You would think they would all have won the lottery at least 17 times apiece, given the sheer immensity of their psychic powers.
Who created God? This argument shows a complete misunderstanding of the reasoning for a creator. A creator is necessary exactly because we know that everything that begins has a cause. And we run into the issue of what caused the first cause, resulting in an infinite regression. Therefore, an uncaused first cause isn't an opinion, it's a necessity. Proof that the beginning is a miracle in and of itself.
Wow, not a great first point, and we were doing so well until now. Because yeah, saying this rule applies to everything, also this other thing that I have posited doesn't follow the rule, using the infinite power of I said so, it doesn't work. And you're implying that infinite regression is some insurmountable problem, when in reality, it's simply unintuitive, not logically impossible. The only reason that God is necessary is because all theist arguments collapse without him, and that is not a good reason for something to be necessary. The same way that stealing is necessary to be a thief. Well, no one told you had to be a thief, did they? I assume. I mean, you are stealing all of the intellect right out of the room, so I could be wrong.
A common rebuttal to this is that the matter of the universe is eternal, which aside from being an unlikely theory given decay, it still runs into the issue of infinite regress to explain the beginning of change. Negative IQ.
Again, infinite regress is only a I don't like it so it must be wrong problem for you. And you have obviously confused matter with energy and the idea of decay with something going away forever. But first off, energy, of course, doesn't decay in a going away sense because it simply changes from one form to another, which folds in neatly to decay simply being matter changing to another form. Again, not actually going anywhere. Finally, the point is, if God can be infinite, why can't we just make that a property of the universe? And why do you think adding shit somehow makes a more elegant solution instead of one that makes less sense? So far, the only low IQ take I'm seeing is from you and your complete inability to understand what words mean.
I believe in science/evolution. Evolution isn't relevant to the theism debate because texts like Genesis don't have to be read literally. And science describes processes. It cannot explain why there is something rather than nothing.
Wow, look at you being wrong. What a shock, for starters. Just because you don't have to read Genesis literally doesn't mean it's not freaking wrong. And when an entire position, like if you're, say, a Christian, relies on the fact of, say, the resurrection, when other parts of the book are clearly nonsense, it calls those into question too. And certainly, at the very least, questions how you know which bits can and can't. Apparently, it's when science proves them wrong, almost like it has utility in discerning the truths of various religious claims. Hardly what I would call irrelevant. Also, the idea that science cannot determine why there is something rather than nothing is in fact nothing but an assertion on your part. You have decided that it can't do that, but there have been plenty of other questions people thought science couldn't answer, and then it's gone and done so anyway. Frankly, if we ever do figure out that thing for certain, then it just becomes a scientific fact, because that's how facts tend to work.
That question is philosophical, not scientific. Treating science as if it can answer every category of question is not science. It's scientism. Negative IQ.
Thinking that science, a methodology that has time and again proven its ability to answer questions thrown at it, will probably answer another one, isn't scientism, it's basic pattern recognition. And taking a question and saying, no, this question belongs to us, doesn't make that so. The question of why everything can be both philosophical and a naturalistic answerable question, whether you like it or not. The same way that where does the sun go at night used to be an impossible idea with no answer without simply making up magical beings. So the question of universal potential origins could and likely will just be another fact that we or some other species discover eventually.
You deny thousands of gods, I just go one further. This one is just sad. This is the equivalent of saying you deny that 2 + 2 has any answer other than 4. I just go one further and say 2 + 2 has no answer.
A completely and obviously, to someone with half a brain cell, false analogy that first assumes you are correct by default and ignores the actual reason that someone might say this to you. You don't believe in your God because you have access to a universally correct answer, even if you think you do. You believe in it for the exact same reason anyone believes in their particular God. You were born into it, or it's the majority faith in your country, or whatever. Essentially, someone, somewhere, convinced you of the one you believe, whereas anyone can figure out that 2 + 2 = 4, regardless of where they grew up or who they have ever spoken to. Also, you are completely ignoring that everyone else's answer wouldn't be that there's no answer, but a zillion different correct answers that they are just as sure of as you are. This analogy would only work if there was no possible way to know the answer and the atheist simply rejected all those unearned assertions, even if one of them is correct, because again, there was literally no way to know. So how could you know?
Theism rejects false gods for the same reason atheism should reject false explanations. Because they're false. Not because there are too many of them. Bottom of negative IQ. Rhetorically catchy, philosophically empty.
First off, theism rejects. The hell does that even mean? Theism is simply a worldview that believes in deities. All theistic worldviews come under theism. Theism is incapable of determining any kind of truth claim because it's a frigging category, you moron. And you absolutely do not reject other gods because they're false. You reject them because you think they are false. There is a universe of difference between the 2 points. And if you don't understand that, then I'm not surprised that you don't understand the actual reason someone might be making that point.
The God of the gaps fallacy. This argument misrepresents theism as just trying to explain away things that they don't yet or can't have an explanation for. It ignores situations where God isn't a convenient explanation, but rather the only possible one, such as the miracle of creation.
Holy hell, you are really stuck on the idea that the beginning of the universe cannot ever be explained other than Magic Man done it. For someone pretending to be some kind of edgy intellectual, the inflexibility and lack of imagination on display is pretty staggering. Also, no, again, the God of the Gaps fallacy is simply pointing out that if you want to use God to explain something, you have to actually justify him as an explanation, not assume it because we don't currently know something for a fact, which is, ironically, exactly what you're doing with the why of the universe. A, by labeling it as a creation so that it needs a creator, and B, assuming that creator has to be some kind of thinking, feeling entity with specific wants and needs, which is a wild leap, even if it did turn out to be that the universe was made by something not of it. Taking a knowledge gap and using God to fill it. If only we had a name for that.
It's not that we can't explain the origin of everything. It's that there's only one logical, non-contradictory explanation. God is not an explanation that competes with scientific explanations. He is the precondition for any explanation existing at all. Flawed here.
I see. Arguments are flawed if to answer them, you have to engage in the exact point that the argument is trying to get you to stop doing. That is some galaxy-brained 4D chess shit right there. And to claim that the argument for a non-contingent God is non-contradictory is freaking hilarious, when the thing literally has to contradict all laws of both nature and logic in order to exist. Also, arguing that God is needed for logic to work is as stupid as arguing that logic only works if there is no God. You're just saying that, not demonstrating it, because you can't, because it's a stupid thing to say.
Lack of empirical evidence. This is just an empiricism fallacy. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Not all rational beliefs are empirically testable. Meaning, morality, logic, and causation itself aren't discovered through lab experiments. We can reason from contingency, causation, and intelligibility, none of which are discovered through microscopes. Flawed here.
Except none of this works when many theistic claims should have physical consequences in the universe, but don't. You are trying to skip over the fact that while certain abstract concepts are not proven in the same way that we prove an event happened, they still very much are demonstrable and useful in reality. Gods, on the other hand, are universally explanations that do literally nothing but make the user of that god feel good. And of course, the old saying, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, falls apart when you've been looking for that evidence non-stop for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, and never actually found it. At that point, absence of evidence would very much appear to be evidence of absence.
The omnipotence paradox. Can God create a stone so heavy he cannot lift it? This is an argument by changing definitions. You've decided that omnipotence means being able to contradict himself and bring in illogical nonsense. Logic is upheld by God as a great good. Omnipotence means the ability to do all that is logically possible, not to perform contradictions masquerading as tasks. This argument is rhetoric masquerading as logic. Negative IQ.
Aside from the fact that gods break logic all the time in various book those, I guess it's lucky that you already decided that those don't count for no reason other than their inconvenience. Either way, all power isn't all power when you place a limit on what it can do, or on the other hand would allow one to do things that don't make any sense, which means that it almost certainly would not be a creature that a human should even try to make any sense of. But the main problem here is you think that defining God and his all power a particular way makes it true. When, well, the fact that you are utterly incapable of understanding why you can't do that, even if you're right, you wouldn't possibly know with the current available information. So you are in fact just making shit up, not proving a damned thing.
The Euthyphro dilemma. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? The dilemma assumes goodness exists independently of God. Classical theism rejects that premise. Since he's the creator, he creates in accordance with his will. The opposite would be illogical. So, the dilemma can be rewritten as, is God's will his will because God wills it? Or does God will it because he wills it? Which is just babble. Negative IQ.
If I completely rewrite the argument, then I win. Got to admit, that's not exactly your strongest point thus far, and they have hardly been great. Also, the dilemma actually assumes almost nothing. It's merely asking a question about the premises that theists claim, those being that good exists and God does it. Anything else is just you adding shit that isn't there. Also, ironically, it feeds back into your last one. Is God logical because he decides what logic is? Or is logic logic and God does it because he can't do otherwise? The point again, which you miss like it's machine gun fire and you are Neo, is that if good or logic or whatever are absolutely objective, they should continue to be so regardless of what God thinks or wants or anything. Otherwise, they are completely arbitrary and subjective to his whims. Even with your stupid straw man version, God's will is still utterly subjective because it's subject to him and what he wants. If another being with the same amount of power were to come along with different ideas, they would be just as valid. And no, just because you think there is only the one, even if you've defined that to be the case, doesn't make that true either.
The problem of divine hiddenness. This argument assumes that God's primary objective is to be known and worshipped. It isn't. Different religions make different claims, but from a Christian perspective, if God made his existence and therefore power as undeniable as gravity, belief would be coerced, not chosen. This isn't about making belief difficult, it's about making relationships possible. A relational God would require freedom for those with whom he has a relationship. God is hidden not to be unreachable, but to not overwhelm. The evidence is sufficient for those who seek honestly, but ambiguous enough for those who don't. That's not a flaw, it's a feature. Flawed tier.
The utter insanity of claiming that knowing someone exists would make it impossible for you to have a relationship with them is so profound that only a theist could come up with it. I mean, for starters, there are countless people I know exist, and I choose not to have relationships with 99.9% of them all the time. And even if they were superpowered guys who threw out books about how I should suck their cocks, I am still completely capable of saying, no mate, I'd rather not. But to also claim that Christianity specifically doesn't have a God that would want to have basically everyone all up in his business is biblical illiteracy, the kind of which could only ever be demonstrated by an internet apologist. He not only constantly showed himself to multiple people repeatedly, there are also numerous sections that constantly bang on about how God loves you and wants everybody to be in his club.
God is a psychological crutch for those who fear oblivion. This argument fails the test of reversibility. I can just as easily say atheism is a psychological crutch for those who fear consequences. Historically, explicitly atheist regimes have produced levels of coercion and mass death unmatched by even the cruelest religious systems. Explaining belief away by alleged motives avoids the question of truth entirely. That's why this isn't an argument, it's an evasion, abyss tier.
The concept that atheists somehow avoid consequences even if they are wrong, and you are right, is idiotic nonsense. If you are wrong, consequences for any and all actions exist in reality, whether you believe in God or not. And if God is real and is going to punish atheists, then he is going to punish atheists. What difference would it make if a person was, choosing not to believe in God, as is heavily implied that they know the consequences by you? But that would mean that the consequences are real and thus unavoidable. I get that you probably think atheists are stupid, but this would make us so catastrophically insane. It would make us completely incapable of understanding them, meaning that applying them to us would be the act of a malicious prick, akin to punching a baby in the face because it kept crying, but you already told him to stop. Do you see how these arguments never work? No, of course you don't, otherwise you wouldn't be making them.
The problem of evil. A lot of theists hand-wave this argument away with philosophical explanations such as free will. But I want to give this argument the credit it deserves. Because if God's will is goodness itself, and He alone created the world, why is there evil? Is that not contrary to His will? This undermines every other argument I've made in this video. It's the limit of philosophy. I can give you 100 theories for why evil exists, but that will never satisfy someone who just lost a loved one, or who is plagued by horrifying disease, or who suffered incredible mistreatment. This is where philosophy ends and religion starts.
While I very much appreciate that you don't like the free will argument because it is, of course, utter dog shit on a plate of fried stupid, the argument itself doesn't undermine all the previous points because it doesn't have to. They are already silly, as pointed out by a coherent understanding of what the anti-theist arguments actually say. The fact that you don't understand them is not relevant to the fact that they all, to more or less degrees, are there to make important points about the religious and the ways they think that the universe works. Also, plenty of people who suffer some kind of painful loss are often absolutely comforted by various meaningless platitudes about God's plans and all that other shit. That doesn't make them any less vacuous, but the fact that you don't know about it is just really weird. But ultimately, it's not the limit of philosophy. It's just an obvious flaw in defining your God as all good with all power, when 3 seconds outside will show you that can't possibly be the case. And instead of going to the far more obvious answer of, well then, maybe he's not all good, not all powerful, or either, most likely because such a being simply doesn't exist. Yet instead, you refuse to let go of those ideas and assume that there can't possibly be an answer, even though it's staring you right in the face.
Strong tier. Lots of religions try to answer the problem of evil, which is not within the scope of this video. But only one has a God that became man, so he may bear it with us, die to it, and overcome it, resulting in a greater good than if no evil were ever present.
Aside from the fact that it's still just a story and not one that's actually unique to the Bible, at least in the broad strokes, the implication is that it's okay that God shit in your bath. Because, right, he's sitting in the shit-filled bath with you. You wouldn't accept that if it was your sibling. You shouldn't accept such an idiotic notion if that sibling was also Superman. It's disgusting, unnecessary, and in fact, far less shit to not sit in a bath filled with human excrement, you unbelievable dumbass.
That concludes this tier list. If you think I ranked any of these incorrectly, especially the strong tier, tell me which one and why. If there are any others you would like to see, share them in the comments below.
Why would you call this every atheist argument ranked and debunked, when you know it's not even remotely comprehensive by your own admission? It's wild, but whatever. All I will say is, of course, your tier list is as good as you are smart. That is to say, not even remotely. Bye!